What are your 3 tips for drop shotting?
Uh, well, my first tip is it's a bait I always have tied on. And I think a lot of people don't realize that. It's not just a bait for deep vertical fishing, it's a bait that I have tied on all the time. The second tip is, with that being said, if I'm fishing a drop shot, I'm going to have a shallow, I'm going to have a very light weight. An 1/8 ounce being the biggest if I'm casting at the shallow targets. When I'm fishing at vertical, that's when I have a big weight. So, adjust the size of the weight depending on the depth that you're fishing. Bigger weight vertical, lighter casting it horizontal. And then the third tip is probably my leader length. The shallower I'm fishing, the shorter that leader length is, and I'm talking about between the worm weight and the weight, or the bait and the weight. And the deeper I'm fishing it, the further away I have that. So that should help you a little bit.
That does help a lot. Thank you so much.
Probably the number one tip on drop shotting is be versatile with your leader length. There are certain times when you don't want your leader over 4 inches, and there are other times when you want your bait 4 feet. A lot of times it's seeing how the fish are positioned. Are they suspended off the bottom? Are they on the bottom? Typically, anytime I'm pitching a drop shot to a target, I always have a tendency to use a smaller length between my hook and my weight. And the reason for that is, a lot of times if you're pitching cypress trees or laydowns or stuff like that, the fish are close to the bottom. So you want your worm down there close to the bottom. Number two would be, don't limit it to a spinning rod. One of the best techniques ever is actually flipping a drop shot on bigger tackle in the same places you would typically fish a Texas rig or a jig, and it's the finesse version of a Texas rig. Basically, is what it is. You're able to get that bait in there with a weight, but the bait is weightless, so it gives you the best of both worlds. Probably the last tip would be, anytime I'm fishing a drop shot, I'm always using a leader, and I typically don't use like straight fluoro. And the reason for that, it'll have a tendency to spin your line or cause your line to kink if you use a straight fluoro. And if you use the fluorocarbon tied to a braid, my main line being the braid, regardless if I'm flipping it on a casting rod or a spinning rod, that just takes that line twist.
Drop shots are something that's caught them for a long time. I mean, Aaron Martins and Guido Hebb and those guys have started, finesse fishing has been very popular. I would say, if you're having issues, go out there on the water and you're saying, okay, well, starting with trying to figure out what color worm you need to throw. You see guys throwing pink, you guys see guys throwing green pumpkins. Keep it simple. I only have 3 different colors. I throw out 3 green pumpkin. I will throw more of like a morning dawn, and then I'll throw a black, a straight black. I've actually caught a lot of fish on black, a black worm shape, when I'm drop shotting. If I'm fishing for smallmouth, they love black for some reason. They can see it in that clear water, and something that they just fish can, they could silhouette that bait and go over there and eat it. Hook choice, that's a huge ordeal. When I'm fishing a wacky style worm on a drop shot, my favorite hook to use is a size 4 VMC Nico hook. And what that is, you have a little bit larger barb, a little bit bigger gap, and you want to have a little bit more meat there, because when that fish grabs a straight shank hook, or like a rebarb, something like that, you're going to have, those fish are going to get it a lot better. You're going to hook them, you're going to land, hook to land ratio is going to be a lot better. And then also, light weights. I see a lot of people, obviously they think drop shot, they think deep water. Yeah. I've caught a lot of big fish in super shallow water on an 1/8 ounce drop shot. So don't be afraid to lighten your weight up and try that.
Drop shotting, the first tip would be to ask somebody else that's a lot better at it than I am. But I do it some, and catch a lot of fish doing it at times. And the biggest thing I would say is on your hook set, don't.
Yeah.
Just reel into them. You're using it on a light line, a small diameter hook. I like that VMC Nico hook for my drop shot fishing. And you don't have to set the hook. You just start reeling, and you got him. So that's one thing that's really nice about it.
Very difficult.
Yeah, it can be. I like to set the hook, but you just don't have to with that. Another would be, to use different leader lengths. There's scenarios where a real short leader is better, and scenarios where a 2-foot leader is better. So play around with that some. That would be. And then ask Aaron Martins what to do.
And ask Aaron Martins.
Those are my 3 tips.
Okay, remember that, folks. Ask Aaron Martins what to do.
Yep, absolutely.
Best 3 tips for drop shotting. For me now, it's my new thing I'm excited about, and I've been fishing the last 2 years. It's an 8.5-foot spinning rod. People can't comprehend that, but I have a new 8.5-foot rod it's my new favorite spinning rod, period. It's a really soft action tip. I can fish 6-pound test on it, or I can fish 20-pound test on it. But the way the rod tip shakes is different than any other rod. So I get a lot more action out of the worm, but I'm able to cast it further. Typically, the further you get a bait away from a boat, the more bites you're going to get. And it allows me to get a much better hook set than a 6.5 or 7-foot rod. The hook sets it's dramatically different. And I fish nanofill to a fluorocarbon leader. So you get the sensitivity, the feel. That would be the tip number 2, is use a braided line. For me, it's nanofill because it casts further. But then going to a fluorocarbon leader, so you get the sensitivity and feel of that. And then third one.
Third one.
Third one. Still the same deal. Typically, the lighter the weight, because a lot of times from a believer, you'll catch more fish on a drop shot when the bait's on a fall than you do actually working on the bottom. So a lighter weight, a slower fall will help you get more bites.
All right, top 3 tips for drop shotting.
Oh, top 3 tips for drop shotting. Oh, I would say the first thing is I prefer a braided line to a fluorocarbon leader. Okay. And the reason for that is the braid is going to allow you to throw a heavier pound test. So I'll throw a 15-pound Seaguar Smackdown braid. And it's the diameter of 6-pound test. So on a spinning reel, I can get a lot more line on there. And it also allows me to cast without the line just exploding off my reel because it has a lot less memory. It's not going to be all coiled up, which is nice on a spinning reel. And then the fluorocarbon leader is going to be clear in the water. It's going to present the bait a lot better and help with abrasion resistance. And the next thing would be probably selecting the bait. Right? A lot of these theories are the same across the board because a drop shot you can select lots of different baits. If I'm up north chasing smallmouth, a lot of times I'm choosing 3-4 inch style baits like a Zoom Z drop or something. When I go down south, a lot of times I'll still drop shot and I'll fish around grass, maybe bigger fish. Then I'll go to like a Zoom trick worm or even a Magnum trick worm. So I've got a little bit bigger profile for those bigger fish. I'll actually rig it Texas rigged on a drop shot so that it's weedless. I can fish it around cover. And then I would say the next thing there would probably be, again, selecting your weight size because a lot of times the rate of fall will trigger those fish, especially if you're in clear water. Those fish see it coming from a long ways away, and just the rate of fall when those fish see it can determine whether or not they bite it when it actually hits the bottom.
Now, do weather conditions also apply too? If it's really windy, if you're going to be drop shotting.
Definitely, you're going to have to up your weight. Typically for me, selecting weights, if I'm less than 10 foot, I'll try to go with an 1/8. 10 to 20, I go to about 1/4, and then 3/8 down to about 30 or 40 foot. And then if it's windy, you have to up those weights, even in the shallower depths.
What are your top 3 tips for drop shotting?
Top 3 tips, I use 2 baits, a Roboworm or a Yamamoto Thin Senko. The Roboworm I'm gonna do Texas rig or with a nose hook. The Thin Senko I'm gonna do wacky rig, and I use both those on a drop shot. They have different actions to them. The wacky rig you can let flutter down and fall, and it falls like a Senko, and then you can lift it and shake it again. The biggest tip that I can give, and this is one that I'm really going to stress, and we're going to leave it with this, is lots of movement with the bait and not movement with the weight. So if you think about a drop shot, the weight's on the bottom, the worm's above. So you want to move that worm without moving the weight, meaning that you can leave that bait in the strike zone. So if you're casting or if you're dropping, it doesn't matter. You can impart action onto that bait without ever moving the weight or moving the bait away from the fish. You can keep it in their face for a long time. And that's the biggest trick with a drop shot.
Perfect. Thank you, and great tips.